Professor De Bono, why do you say that the biggest problem of the world is not climate change or global warming, but is our poor thinking?
What happened in the Middle Ages, Renaissance, when Greek thinking came into Europe, schools, universities, and thinking in general were in the hands of the church. The church did not need perceptual thinking. The church did not need creative thinking. The church did not need design thinking. What the church did need was truth, logic, and argument. So we developed very well the thinking for finding the truth. And that has been very useful, excellent in science. We can land people on the moon, we can have internet and many other wonderful examples of science and technology. But what we have never developed is the thinking for creating value. To be sure, individuals have done that, but it has never been part of our culture and today is not part of our education at any level. So we are very short of the thinking for creative value. For example, in conflict situations, we rush to judge who is wrong, how we can punish them, how we can attack them. We never have the ability to say, how do we design a way forward? So we're very inclined to use judgment rather than design, to use logic rather than perception, even though research shows that 90% of the errors of thinking are errors of perception, not of logic. And then we have argument, which is a very primitive, crude, and inefficient way of exploring a subject, and yet we use it in law courts and parliament and so on. So all these things are very poor, very feeble in terms of our thinking, and we can improve them very considerably.
Professor De Bono, do you believe that we can improve our thinking, and how can this be done?
There are new techniques, new frameworks for thinking, which I have developed over the years. These follow an understanding of the brain as a self-organizing information system. So for the first time in human history, we can relate thinking directly to how the brain works. Over the centuries, philosophers and psychologists have been playing with words, and that does not give us any effective thinking techniques. So from an understanding of how the brain works, which I wrote up in my book, The Mechanism of Mind, in 1969, that book was read by the leading physicist in the world, Professor Murray Gell-Mann, who got his Nobel Prize for discovering the quark. Very enthusiastic. He commissioned a team of computer experts to simulate what I said in the book, and he said, yes, it works exactly as you predict. He's been a great supporter. So from that basis, we can develop some of the techniques, for example, the techniques of lateral thinking. We can develop processes of parallel thinking instead of argument, and develop methods of perceptual thinking. All these now are in use. They're in use in business. They're in use in schools. Even, for example, in the United States, the juries in court are beginning to use my method of parallel thinking.
Professor, what are some of our results?
Results, for example, there's a centre in London, the Hungerford Guidance Centre, which takes youngsters who are too violent to be taught in ordinary schools. They've stabbed the teacher, set the school on fire. Especially goes to this centre, the Hungerford Guidance Centre. 20 years ago, the principal, David Lane, started teaching my thinking to these very violent youngsters. He's now done a 20-year follow-up and showed the rate of actual criminal conviction for those taught thinking is less than 1/10 compared to those not taught thinking. Teaching thinking for just 5 hours to unemployed youngsters on the government New Deal program in the United Kingdom increased employment 500%, stronger than anything they'd ever done. In schools, research shows that teaching my thinking as a separate subject improves the performance in every other subject by between 30 and 100%. ABB, a company in Finland, used parallel thinking, and they used to take 30 days for their multinational project discussions. Now they do it in 2 days. IBM and the top research laboratory showed they reduced meeting times to 1/4. JP Morgan in Europe reduced meeting times to 1/10. So all around the world, people are finding that these new methods of thinking are much more powerful than the existing methods, and they're beginning to be taught in schools. There are now many thousands of schools in the world teaching my methods, and in universities and in businesses. The notion that thinking is a skill that can be taught and can be acquired. Even, for example, creative thinking is a skill that can be acquired. It is not just a natural talent, which some people are born with, others are not. Creative thinking is a skill that can be acquired just as much as you can acquire skill at skiing or cooking or mathematics. You can learn it, practice it, and develop it. So these things are happening around the world. I'm told the Chinese government is trying out my work in school in 5 provinces, and if they like the results, they may introduce it into 680,000 schools. So these things are happening now around the world.
How could be this relevant for Pisa?
There are a number of ways. Obviously, this thinking could be taught in all the schools in the region in Pisa. This thinking could be taught in the universities as a foundation subject. And then there's a big project I have to set up a palace of thinking, a palace of new thinking, to provide some new ideas, new possibilities in world issues, world problems, world affairs. The United Nations are incapable of doing this, and I tried to do it in the United Nations many years ago, and they said, we're not here to think, we're here to represent our countries, not to think. So I'm looking for a place to set up a palace of thinking where there'd be international meetings on world problems and issues, and the results would be published as possibilities, alternatives for action. Pisa could be the place where this palace was set up.